What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by a very special guest, longtime friend of the program and a former colleague of mine at the Green Bay Press-Gazette. It's Mr. Pete Dougherty. How are you, Pete?
Yeah, back in the good old days. I'm doing I'm doing well, Aaron. How about you?
I'm doing well. Yes, we have come a long way from talking into an iPad in Corey's backyard. I
Was it?
also I also recall the first game I ever covered for the Press-Gazette. We were down in Jacksonville, and pregame we had to do a Facebook Live, and I felt like my face was melting. That
It
was
was yeah, that was a scorcher for sure. Yeah. The thing I liked about that was, as far as I could tell, you did zero prep work and you would just set up the camera and you started talking and
yeah. Well,
everything was coherent. And I was totally amazed. It was just like you could roll out of bed and do it. I
well,
don't know how you do it. But anyway, that was a lot of fun.
Pete, it's good to know very little has changed in that regard. So I did want to talk to you heading into this week. Obviously, training camp is kicking off in earnest on Wednesday. First practice on the 23rd. Vets set to report on the 22nd. We had the rookies, quarterbacks, and injured players in on Friday. Some news percolating around that, but I did want to kind of touch on a piece that you wrote at the Press-Gazette that I really liked, as far as 5 storylines that fans can kind of pay attention to and keep tabs on heading into this season, because I do think we get so kind of in the weeds, so to speak, during camp. It's good to have a touchstone of here's what we're working towards, and the Packers are going to be dealing with on kind of an overarching basis throughout the season. And I think your first one right out of the gate is 100% correct. A big season from Jordan Love. And I did want to start by asking you about my pet theory. I know we've talked as a collective in the media and the fan base about Jordan's injuries, right? And he was asked about it at the Super Bowl and things like that. I believe that his entire season would have been different last year if he's there at the very first day of camp, because he missed, a handful of days, and it wasn't a huge amount of time, but a handful of days due to that contract issue. And it just never felt like he was in sync with the guys, even after the contract was sorted. He got on the field. And I'm telling you, man, I think being on the field at day one of camp this year is going to make a difference.
I haven't even thought of that. And there could be something to it because, especially with a young quarterback, if it's an older guy, but even with the older guys, their players are new a lot of times. And so, teams with the CBA, they just don't do that much stuff together. And there's limited time that they have together now. So you got to squeeze the most of it. And that's why these injuries in camp can make a difference. My suspicion is that the injury was probably a little more of a factor.
No doubt.
And just the normal up and down. I mean, look at CJ Stroud. He's a really good player. He had a phenomenal rookie season. And statistically, he was worse last year. I'm sure he was a better quarterback, but statistically, he was worse. So, yeah, you put those 3 things together. I'm sure it did. You know what? Because he did. He missed, 3 or 4 practices?
I think I want to say 4, and he was on the field
that sounds
for the 5th.
about right. Yeah, I think he missed pretty much the first week. All that stuff, it all adds up. And especially with the limited time that they spend together. I used to just dismiss, if guys had to miss some time. And you don't want to ever make too much of it because, they're professional athletes and all that. But I suspect, especially in these days of the limited practice times, that, even missing a few days can matter. And I don't doubt that you throw that in the mix, that was a factor.
How much do you put on Jordan in that regard? And as far as like the output in the season, and I know he and Matt both kind of pushed back on the idea that, he had fallen off a little bit or whatever. And, I actually agree with them. But how much do you put on the quarterback, and how much do you put on, say, the issues at wide receiver when it comes to, it was very clear that the offense was not the same, right? That the production wasn't there. The efficiency wasn't there. They were brutal on 3rd and 4th down, where they had been excellent in 2023. How much of that is Jordan? How much of that is the receivers? How much of that is Matt? Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility to go around there. I mean, different, websites had different numbers of drops, but they were in the, the mid 30s. And that was like second or third most in the league. And if you knock down 10 of those, make 10 of those catches, especially, some of those were third downs, keeping drives alive. There was one early in the season by, now I'm blanking on that, their third string running back they ended up having where he dropped one at about the 10.
Oh, Brooks. Yeah.
Brooks, he dropped one. Yeah, he's a good player.
The Viking game. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
He just dropped that one, and that might have been a touchdown. And instead they end up, I think they ended up kicking a field goal on that possession, losing a tight game. Those things matter. So, that's part of it for sure. I think Love had his moments where his accuracy wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't bad, but where it wasn't great. And I still wonder, how much the knee effect, even when he was running where he looked like he was running, normally, if the knee was still a factor throwing the ball. He kind of suggested at that last press conference that it was, you asked him how his elbow was, and he said, I was fine. Didn't bother me. Cause remember he'd heard it the game before.
Right.
No, it was fine. Didn't bother me. How about your knee? How much did that affect you after you were, running okay? And he said, well, everybody's got to play with stuff. And it's, it wasn't a big deal or something. He put it like that. That kind of suggested it was at least somewhat of a factor for him for a lot of the season. And I still think a lot of it is just, you and I have talked about this, the growth with these guys. It's not linear. It's not just a graph where the line just
I was
goes
glad to see
up.
you write that too, because it is something that doesn't get really talked about a whole lot, but it doesn't ever. I mean, it's very rare, let's say that, where it's just an upward trajectory, right?
Yeah.
It can be up and down. And I thought, like I said, you highlighted that idea, and I think it's spot on because there are so many factors, right? You hear Matt talk about it all the time. Maybe we roll our eyes a little bit, but he's right, as far as you're dealing with a lot at quarterback and you're counting on a lot of other guys doing their jobs. And, that brings us into point 2 here, where you said, let the wide receiver jockeying begin, which I love that kind of idea and that image of these guys really, the competition at this spot. And we talked to Brian Gutekunst about it a little bit here on Cheesehead TV earlier this offseason. But man, the way he went about creating competition at that position this offseason, I think says everything you need to know about how disappointed he was in their performance in 2024.
Yeah, I have to believe those last 3 games just really jumped out to him. Their passing game just tanked in those last 3 games, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big fight for snaps, for targets. Plus, you got to throw the tight ends in there. They've got a good starting tight end. Kraft's a good player.
Yes.
So this is going to be, like you take Savion Williams, really raw. Like, we've all seen, I can't remember was it Andy Herman who put together the thing on the Twitter of his highlights and lowlights?
I think so, yes. Right.
And it was remarkable, the great plays he made and the simple plays, the easy throws that he dropped. But, this is a talented guy. Can they find a niche role for him where, he plays slot and they throw him bubble screens and they give him jet sweeps and they fake jet sweeps and keep it real simple when he's, for him. But he could still, and he wouldn't have to play a ton of snaps, but he could still make a difference if he's getting first downs and maybe breaking a big play every game or every other game. A guy like that could make a real difference besides whether Matthew Golden's speed ends up making a difference. I think it's going to be a big battle of course it is. It's going to be a big battle for snaps and for targets. And I'll be really curious to see who are the top 3, top 4 guys.
That's it, right? Like even
come November, when they got things figured out.
Even coming out of the gate, like what's going to transpire at practice over the course of the next couple of weeks is going to be so interesting as far as who's out there and how much they're out there and which sets they're out there, because that's what's so kind of odd about this group is Jaden Reed is so clearly breaks Sterling Sharp's reception record as a rookie, right? And you're thinking, man, the arrow is pointing up there. And then very clearly had issues last year, had a number of third down drops, really fell off production-wise. But some of that is certainly predicated on the fact that he's never out there. I mean, almost never out there when they go 2 wide receivers. So how is this guy supposed to get into a rhythm? How is he supposed to get production going when he's not on the field for so much of what their offense is based on? So you throw, obviously there's the Dobbs concussion stuff going on. You got Wicks with his drops issues. Man, it's going to be fascinating to see who's out there early and often with the ones on a consistent basis and who can make plays on a consistent basis. Because, I just think the competition is going to be fierce. There's
And
zero doubt there.
this coach likes putting 2 tight ends out there.
Right.
And we all know,
Keeps talking about it.
what Musgrave has gone through.
Right.
So if he stays healthy, is he a good player? And do they do more 2 tight ends with him and Kraft? Because when they've mentioned in the past anyway, guys to stretch the field, especially with Watson out, they'll throw Musgrave's name in there as a guy to stretch the middle seam. So I think we'll all be looking to see if he can keep his feet when he catches the ball 50 yards, 40 yards downfield too.
That's a big component. Corey and I have kind of been joking about this for the last kind of 6 months, but every time, like Musgrave obviously has missed a lot of time being hurt, but like whenever he's healthy, they start talking about it. They start the 2 tight end sets, and we're going to utilize 2 tight ends more, but it never quite materializes. Not the way I know you and I have seen kind of happen in Green Bay and other places over the years. Doesn't really feel like Matt ever leans into it, but maybe that's a product of Musgrave needing to stay healthy.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, when they did it last year, it was more, because it was Kraft and then, one of their deeper backups.
Right.
Yeah. It was a run the ball,
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think back to, remember when they had Chamer and Keith Jackson, man,
Yes,
that was a pretty potent offense and a duo that they had. And I think Holmgren made a lot of hay with that 2 tight end stuff.
It's just a great way to dictate matchups, and I think it would be nice to see Matt lean into that. And I think he would like to. It's just they got to keep Musgrave on the field. And then you flip it around on the other side of the ball. Where will the pass rush come from? And I want to ask you point blank, were you surprised how little Brian did personnel-wise to kind of juice the pass rush this offseason? And essentially, it seems like they're really counting on DeMarcus Covington and or Kenny Clark and Lucas Van Ness being healthy. Like that seems to be the formula that they're counting on to unlock their 4-man rush.
Yeah, I got to say, when free agency started, I thought it was a given they'd sign somebody. Now, maybe they wouldn't get one of the real expensive guys, but I thought they'd at least go for a 1-year stopgap older guy, or, a guy who's been, drafted high, who's had some injuries. Maybe they'd try a guy like that who wouldn't be super costly, and they didn't do any of it. So yeah, I was really surprised. And then I thought, it was a given. How dumb can you be after being through this for 30 some years that I would think this, but I thought it was a given they would take some form of pass rusher in the first 3 rounds.
Hey, a lot of us did, man.
Guy.
It wasn't
could have
just
been an
you.
inside guy.
Yep.
But
yep.
And they didn't. And so yeah, it was a real surprise. And really I think if any of the new players is going to help them, I don't know, the best bet might be Oliver, the 5th round pick,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like from the scouts I've talked to, Sorrell, is really good. Sorrell, he's a good player and a guy you want in your roster and all that, but he's more a complete guy and he's not a super dynamic rusher. So, Oliver probably has of all the new guys. I think you're right, though. I think they must think that there's still a lot of untapped stuff in Van Ness. And I don't know if they must think Rashawn Gary can have a bigger year. I mean, his career is kind of looking to be a guy who is really good at getting pressure, and just okay at getting sacks. Getting sacks.
I will say though, but here's the other thing that I find so odd, and maybe this is what drove, or partly what drove, the Rebovich firing and dismissal. It's just the usage. The idea that I think Rashawn Gary was on the field for less than 60% of the defensive snaps last year, right? And this is supposed to be your premier edge guy. Lucas Van Ness is losing snaps to the Aaron Mosbys and Bretton Cox Juniors of the world on 3rd downs, on passing downs. So to me, I think maybe some of what the hope is with Covington is that the situational stuff, or at least the kind of rotation, changes and hopefully gets some of these frontline guys or supposed frontline guys just on the field more. Because I don't think, you're looking at, if you look at the top 10 pass rushers, especially by contract, almost all those guys are out on the field like 80% of the snaps, right? Yeah. I mean, and Rashawn Gary is off the field a whole lot compared to those guys.
Yeah, they must think Covington has maybe got some better technique teaching. I mean, I'm sure all these coaches do it differently. So, the one thing that it's just kind of a little thing, but I wondered about was, so ever since they drafted Van Ness, they talked about, he can, he could probably move inside and rush too. And I'm not sure I'd ever seen him rush inside in training camp. Those his first 2 camps. If he did, it was like once.
Yep.
And in the OTAs on one of the days, he took a couple snaps on the inside. And it's the first time in the offseason, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
So I wonder if maybe, on 3rd and 9, that if they're going to try using him inside and, kind of their new version of what was their rushing package before. It wasn't Greyhound, but it was some name like that.
Was it Nitro or NASCAR?
Yeah, NASCAR. There
have been so many kind of built up names that we got excited about as fans that just rarely delivered. I think NASCAR was good. Like that was under Dom, and that was good for like 3 weeks, and we got really excited about it. And then legit, once it was on tape, everyone was like, "Oh, just block it like this," and blah blah blah, and then it was effectively done.
It reminds me of when they when he had that elephant defense, which
oh my gosh, was that the one leading?
We couldn't write about it in training camp,
right?
And they never did it in the preseason. They used it in the opener
against Seattle. Yep.
It got scorched, and I don't think we saw it again for the rest of the year.
Again. That's so good. Speaking of the lines and winning up front, you'd also touched on the offensive line and the shuffle there, and this Elton Jenkins thing is so interesting, and the fact that he has been placed on and arrived as an injured player and has been placed on the non-football injury list. Okay, I'm trying not to be paranoid here, Pete, but I know he didn't participate at all in the offseason stuff. He did show up to minicamp, but did not participate. Do you think, is this a case of, oh yeah, I quote, hurt myself while I was away, and so the Packers have to put him on the NFI, both sides knowing that this is a stare down about the contract?
That's my suspicion. Yeah. How can you not
think
that? I mean, the hold-ins have become a common thing in this league now. And, you talk about Love missing time last year. I mean, this could be an issue. This guy starts missing practices because they're going to want their starting 5 practicing together as much as possible. And especially because he's making the transition to center. So, he needs his work with Love. I would want to get this resolved ASAP if I were the Green Bay Packers.
And what do you make of Jordan Morgan heading into year 2? And we've heard Brian and Matt really talk up the idea of a competition at left tackle. And I know you wrote about it, and I agree. I'd be very surprised if all of a sudden Rasheed Walker is just out of a job. Yeah. Because with Jordan Morgan, at least yes, he can also compete at right guard. And he also brings value as a 6th offensive lineman, which was never more apparent than in the playoff game when you lost Elton Jenkins and everything fell apart. So that makes sense to me as far as where I could see it headed. But if he beats out Walker at left tackle, then Walker's your swing tackle, I guess. I mean, to me, that would be fascinating.
Yeah, I just I'll be really surprised. I mean, Walker is a competent left tackle, which I don't want to undersell the value of competent,
Right. Yes.
So I don't think Morgan will beat out Ryan at right guard. I don't think. So I'm sure a lot of fans would be really disappointed and consider him a bust if he's not one of the 5 starters. I still wouldn't make that judgment. I would wait to see what he does in years 3 and 4. Like if he becomes their starting left tackle down the road and and they sign him to a second contract, then it's still a really good pick.
Yep. Agreed.
If he plays 2 years and they let him 2 more years after this year and they let him walk, then it's not a real good pick. But just in and of itself, if he's not a starter this year, I would not consider that a disaster. It's not the way you want it. You want your first round pick to be so good you can't keep him off the field. But you're picking in the mid 20s. It's you don't always get what you want there, right?
Tougher to be perfect down there.
It is.
That's the thing, especially when you're constantly picking down there, which the Packers have more often than not. But yeah, I'm with you. I think I'll understand it. As a fan, you do get a little frustrated with, especially as there are other players who were available at the time who are now on other teams. I'm thinking of the guy down in Tampa who I know a lot of Packers fans wanted. He's playing center down there, and he's playing lights out. And so as a fan, you're like, well, we could have taken that guy. We could have had him and blah, blah, blah. But I'm with you. I think the most likely outcome is he's your sixth guy.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's how much do you make, by the way, talking about Elton Jenkins and whatever happens there at center, if he's there, great. Obviously, that was the plan. Put him next to Banks. Hopefully you dominate, especially in the run game. But what did you think about Jacob Monk suddenly being thrown in with the ones at center? I know he was rotating with Sean Ryan. Ryan was the backup center last year, so that wasn't a surprise. But Jacob Monk got, some real decent looks, at least during the offseason. I wonder if we see some more of that in camp.
He did, because he kind of became a forgotten guy, because in the playoff game against the Eagles when they had the injuries,
right?
I don't know if you could see it on TV, but Monk started warming up, started doing snaps on just off the sideline.
Right.
And so, okay, Monk's coming in, and then they didn't do it. And, I don't think I ever got around it, because, you didn't get a chance after the game. If I ever got around to asking LaFleur or any of the offenses, Stenovich or whoever, why they didn't put Monk in there, I suspected it was because the Eagles are just so big up front and Monk's a little on the smaller side.
Smaller guy. Yeah.
And they didn't want to, a big playoff game and communication stuff. They didn't want to, put it all on a rookie like that. So I thought in camp, he's one of those guys who you see him standing there and you go, man, that's not a very impressive looking dude.
Right.
And then you watch him play football and it's like, there's these centers who they come along out like Lindsley and all these guys.
Right.
Scott Wells, there's just these guys who just have a knack for blocking the guy who they're supposed to block.
Getting in front of the guy. Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
They just block him, you know, and they figure it out quick and they're able to do it. And he's just struck me last year in camp watching, from my untrained eye, he appeared to improve from week 1 to week 5. And I just thought, this guy, I wonder if he's going to be their starting center in a year or two. I think they kind of, you could tell by the way they talked about him when they drafted him that's kind of what they viewed him
That was
as.
the hope, I think.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, I don't think he's going to be in the running for a starting job this year, but, I can see why Jenkins is worried about all this stuff because, maybe he thinks they're going to just play him for a year and then cut him.
Right.
And then they're going to put Monk in there and they're going to have Morgan, and then he's going to have to look for work elsewhere.
And not be able to make as much because he's been playing center.
Yeah. Right? You don't make as much as that position. So I can see why he's concerned about these things. And if things work out the way you and I suspect, then they'll have Morgan as their 6th guy and they could have Monk as their 7th guy. And if he shows the progress that I was thinking he might show, to go 7 deep is where you feel pretty decent.
I mean,
that's pretty good in the NFL.
Very good in the NFL. And the other aspect here too, especially talking about the offensive line last year, I don't think fans probably feel this way because of what a disaster it was in Philadelphia at the end of the season. But through the season in general, they were really healthy up front. And that never happens. I mean, you talk about you're always getting dinged up front. You're having to slide guys around or bring a guy off the bench. And they had such good luck there last season. You can't count on that 2 years in a row.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's good. I remember reading, Ryan Wood went back through every game tape and watched every play, for his grades. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it was something like the starting 5 played its highest percentage of plays in like 8 years, something like that.
That's insanely healthy.
Definitely not something you can count on. Absolutely and as we learned, it didn't happen it happens in the playoffs is when it matters most,
Exactly. Right. After you've been healthy all year long.
Yeah.
And finally, I love this because brings out passionate opinions from fans worldwide. Which rookie will help the Packers most in 2025? And what I love is that you do almost instantly acquiesce to the idea that, it's probably going to be Matthew Golden. I think that makes the most sense. But I tell you what, it wouldn't be a shock to me if it ends up being, Savion Williams or even Colin Oliver, like we were talking about earlier. Like, you just never really know. It's about opportunity more than anything else, and then being able to build on those opportunities. But I do concede that, Golden's probably going to get opportunities early and often.
Because you don't ever know. Some guys just adapt quicker too. I think of when they drafted Jarrell Worthy in the 2nd round and Mike Daniels in the 4th round. and they drafted, Worthy to give him a little more inside rush. He's a total washout. And Daniels is a good player. Daniels played pretty well as a rookie, even, So, this kind of thing happens. All the Aaron Jones, they drafted running backs.
3 in a row.
Yeah. 4th, 5th, and 6th, or whatever. So Jones was in the middle of that. He ended up by far being the best, right? You just never know which of these guys will have the bigger impact. And like I said earlier, Williams theoretically, is the project of, one of the biggest projects of that group. But if they can just have a really niche role for him and keep things pretty simple for him, jet sweeps and bubble screens and quick slants and all that stuff, who knows? Maybe he's a infrequent but still, important playmaker in the offense.
I mean, he is lights out with the ball in his hands. There's zero doubt about that. And if there's a package or two where they are legit just trying to focus and target him, he could absolutely, especially in the red zone. That's the other thing. Like, if they weren't pounding it with Josh Jacobs in the red zone last year, it was really touch and go, right? There were a lot of ups and downs. And a guy like Savion Williams, he could be useful in that regard. Even a buddy of mine suggested they go wildcat and they put him in the backfield there at the 5-yard line or whatever, and they split Jordan Love out just to, run some wrinkles that maybe people haven't seen. I don't know if I'm ready to go there yet, but that's the type of thing that Savion Williams could bring to the table.
Yeah, you can see it on the tape that he's a big guy, but in person, he's a really big guy. He's 220 pounds, and he can, going by the tape, he's pretty good at cutting and changing directions. So I don't know. Yeah, if he's the part of that role would be lining him up in the backfield sometimes too.
Love it. He scored 6 touchdowns out of the backfield last year.
I
as a running
totally get the Debo Samuel comparisons.
Right. Yes,
they're not the same guy, but I can see the similarities for usage.
Very much agreed.
So yeah, maybe it's him. Maybe it's Colin Oliver, or maybe it's the 7th round corner. Who knows?
Or they get hurt up front, and Anthony Belton comes in and saves the season.
Anything can happen. Yeah.
Anything can happen.
Yeah.
Pete, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the time. Make sure you're checking out Pete's stuff at the Green Bay Press-Gazette. I've got a link to his article in the description of this video. Pete, I will see you in about a week. Really looking forward to it. Thanks so much, man.
Yep. Sounds good, Aaron. Thanks for having me.